Hello, space travelers. Welcome to the channel where people create stories about the universe. Get ready for a new adventure.
The Lena Orbital Institute floated out in space like some grand monument to academic ego, its crystal towers reflecting the light from 3 nearby stars in a way the designers probably believed looked deeply inspiring. Honestly, to me, it looked more like somebody hung a giant chandelier in orbit and decided to call it a university. Still, when you're known as the top learning institution in a galaxy packed with 47,000 intelligent species, I guess you earn the right to show off a little. For 3,000 years, LOI had been turning out the galaxy's best and brightest. Diplomats who could settle trade disputes without sparking wars, scientists who managed to split atoms without splitting their teams apart, and engineers who built ships that only blew up once in a while. The student population represented the absolute peak of galactic civilization. Most of them came from worlds where the deadliest creature you'd meet might only give you a slightly annoying rash if you were unlucky. You had the shining citizens of Pacifica Ix, whose greatest daily challenge back home was choosing which of 7 safe, edible fruits to eat in the morning. The Vrin Collective came from a heavy-gravity moon, where the air was so dense that even a long fall felt like landing on a pile of soft cushions stacked on top of each other. Even the reptilian Kreshnar, who loved talking about their proud warrior traditions, actually came from a planet where war usually meant heated arguments over land that ended with everyone heading home in time for dinner. Then humanity sent in an application to join. The Galactic Assessment Board spent 6 full months studying Earth, and their final report was incredible reading, assuming you considered phrases like apocalyptic weather patterns, mega-predator ecosystems, and actively hostile plate tectonics entertaining. Earth earned a 9.8 out of 10 on the Presnell-Rayard Death World Index, losing only 0.2 of a point because it lacked acid rain, which the board politely described as an apparent oversight by the planet itself. The world featured storms capable of leveling cities, oceans powerful enough to erase islands, and a sun that could literally give you cancer if you stayed under it too long. Humans had evolved alongside animals that could crush them, devour them, poison them, or, in some especially creative cases, do all 3 at once. Even their own bodies sometimes turned against them through something called allergies, where their immune systems randomly decided peanuts were mortal enemies and attempted to eliminate the host along with them. Unsurprisingly, the admissions committee rejected humanity's application. Then humans invented faster-than-light travel in just 18 months, claiming the achievement was powered mainly by spite and caffeine. Suddenly, the committee developed a deep respect for human potential. Nothing changes opinions faster than proving you never needed permission in the first place. That all happened 5 years ago. Now, humans attended LOI alongside every other species, and the university had learned to keep medical teams ready whenever they showed up. It wasn't because humans were violent. Actually, they were the opposite. Friendly, eager, and strongly devoted to peace and cooperation. The real issue was that humans had absolutely no idea how terrifying they actually were. Professor Halvoran stood at the front of an advanced quantum mechanics class, all 7 of his eye stalks fixed on equations floating in a holographic display before him. As a centurion, his species was famous for patience, wisdom, and an unfortunate inability to cope with stress. His skin had shifted from its normal calm blue to a worried purple-gray about 10 seconds after he noticed a human name on his class roster. The classroom itself represented cutting-edge design. Seats adjusted to any body shape, atmospheric controls supported everything from methane breathers to chlorine lovers, and the walls were reinforced to survive what the architects carefully labeled energetic academic discussions. Human proofing had been added just last semester after a student got excited about a discovery and accidentally punched a hand straight through a wall while gesturing. Vaelric sat in the 3rd row, his crystalline body bending light in a way he personally considered far more elegant than anyone else in the room. The Vrin species took great pride in their biology. silicon-based beings whose forms looked like living gemstones. They were strong, beautiful, and came from a world where the worst accident imaginable involved falling into a mineral deposit and needing several hours to climb back out. This particular Vryn belonged to the Fifth Noble House, a lineage responsible for producing senators, scientists, and one famously dull author who wrote an autobiography focused entirely on administrative reform. Vaelric displayed his privilege the same way his ancestors displayed their awards, openly and with the expectation of admiration. His academic achievements shone nearly as brightly as his body: top scores in theoretical physics, advanced mathematics, and what might as well have been called condescension toward inferiors 101. He personally found humanity's presence at LOI offensive. In his view, these death-world creatures had forced their way into galactic society through brute technological progress, which he considered deeply improper. His people had spent thousands of years perfecting culture, refining art, and mastering the delicate skill of looking down on everyone else. Humans, meanwhile, showed up armed with duct tape, bold confidence, and fully functional warp drives, and somehow acted like they belonged there. The quantum field variations, Professor Halvorin was saying, three of his eye stalks now nervously watching the doorway, demonstrate an unusual relationship with gravitational constants that contradicts our previous understanding. The door opened. Every alien in the room turned their head at once. All 43 students froze, holding whatever passed for breath in their species. Up front, Professor Halvorin's skin shifted fully into a deep shade of stress purple. Then the human walked in. Calling her entrance casual would have been like calling a supernova mildly bright. She moved with an effortless kind of confidence, the sort evolution gives apex predators after millions of years at the top of the food chain, the kind that never had to question whether it belonged somewhere. Her stride covered ground efficiently, like someone built for long hunts across open land. Her arms swung loosely, ready without trying, the way you'd expect from a species whose ancestors learned to throw rocks hard enough to kill from a distance. But, honestly, it was her face that made the whole situation unsettling. Two forward-facing eyes, the universal predator signal, swept across the room, casually evaluating everything in a way prey species recognized deep in their instincts. When she smiled at another student, her teeth flashed just long enough to reveal sharp canines made for tearing meat. Somewhere inside nearly every alien present, ancient survival instincts started screaming warnings that basically translated to, "That thing hunts creatures like you." She wore what humans apparently considered normal clothes: pants made from some synthetic fabric, a shirt covered in writing nobody else understood, and shoes that looked comfortable enough for walking, but probably worked just as well for sudden sprinting. Her hair was tied back in a practical way that said she didn't have time to fuss with it, which somehow felt more intimidating than if she'd tried to look threatening on purpose. "Sorry, I'm late, Professor," she said, her voice carrying that easy, apologetic tone humans used for minor inconveniences. "The transit pod thought I was cargo again and tried to send me to storage." That actually happened a lot. Human bone density and muscle mass made them much heavier than most species their size, so automated systems constantly misclassified them as freight. The university had already filed 47 complaints with transit authorities, who suggested humans might consider weighing less, which, technically speaking, solved nothing. "Quite all right, Miss Whitmore," Professor Halvorin replied, his voice tightening slightly. Every eye stalk tracked her movement toward an empty seat the way someone might watch a live explosive being carefully relocated. "Please, sit wherever you prefer, preferably somewhere structurally reinforced." Her name was Lena Whitmore, though she preferred to go by L, but the university database insisted on formality. She lowered herself into a second-row seat with controlled precision that somehow still hinted at restrained power. The chair, engineered to support triple the average student's weight, let out a faint groan anyway. She pulled out a datapad and stylus, giving off the relaxed friendliness of someone completely unaware that half the class was mentally rewriting their wills. Vaelric watched the whole thing with glittering disdain. Since the semester began, he'd kept a close eye on the human, waiting for any justification to challenge her presence. What bothered him most was that she consistently earned the highest scores on every assessment. Humanity showing up in civilized space was already offensive enough in his opinion, but having one prove intellectually superior felt like a personal insult. As I was saying, the professor continued, voice slightly unsteady, the quantum field variations present unique challenges to our understanding. Miss Whitmore, since you've just arrived, perhaps you could explain the central paradox we are examining. Elle glanced up from her notes. Around her, several nearby students subtly leaned their seats farther away. Sure, she said brightly, with the kind of human enthusiasm everyone else instinctively interpreted as impending violence. We're looking at the gap between quantum behavior at the particle level and large-scale gravitational effects, basically why the equations work perfectly in simulations but fail when applied to real stellar systems. The current theory says there's probably a missing mediating force, but nobody's figured out what it is or why it only shows up at stellar scales. She explained all of this as casually as someone talking about the weather, completely unaware that 3 students in the back were seriously considering dropping the course just to avoid sharing oxygen with her. Precisely correct, Professor Halvoran said, though 2 of his eye stalks had shifted toward Vaelric, whose crystalline body had begun glowing brighter, the Vryn equivalent of anger. The mathematical models suggest. Vaelric cut him off, his voice resonating with the specific harmonic tone his species used when announcing intellectual superiority. I find it curious, he said, that we accept answers from a species that only discovered quantum mechanics a few centuries ago. My people were studying these principles when humans were still striking rocks together. The classroom fell completely silent. Even the professor's eye stalks stopped moving. Elle turned toward Vaelric, her expression polite and genuinely interested, a reaction that made everyone else sink deeper into their seats. That's actually really cool, she said, because humans apparently viewed academic history as fascinating instead of recognizing insults. So, what conclusions did your people reach about the mediating force problem? Vaelric's crystalline form pulsed with irritation. She was supposed to feel offended, not curious. We determined, he said stiffly, that certain species simply lack the cognitive sophistication required to understand advanced concepts. Perhaps discussion should remain focused on material appropriate for the full spectrum of intellect present. Vaelric, Professor Halvoran said quickly, his skin shifting into colors that probably didn't even have names. That is entirely inappropriate. I am merely observing, Vaelric continued, growing more confident, that academic standards must have declined if students are admitted from worlds where survival depends more on physical capability than intellectual development. Muscles and aggression are easy evolutionary outcomes. True intelligence requires proper environmental pressures. Up front, a glimmering student named Corin, who had befriended Elle during orientation, made a soft, panicked sound like wind chimes caught in a storm. Maybe we should take a break, someone suggested hopefully. A long break. Maybe a semester-long one. Elle's expression didn't change, but her posture shifted just enough that any species with a decent threat assessment instinct immediately recognized something had gone very, very wrong. Are you saying I don't belong here? She asked. Her voice stayed friendly, curious even, which somehow felt more dangerous than anger. I am saying, Vaelric replied, rising to his full height, still several inches shorter than Elle, even while she remained seated, though he clearly hadn't noticed that detail, that your presence here is merely a courtesy extended to a young species, not acknowledgement of genuine capability. You are a physical specimen, not an intellectual one. Vaelric, Professor Halvoran snapped, his voice cracking across multiple frequencies. Sit down, immediately. But Vaelric had momentum now. Pride and prejudice mixed together into something impressively foolish. In fact, he continued, I would wager that by any objective measure of ability, the human would prove inferior. Her grades are likely inflated out of political politeness. I doubt she could win a fair competition of any kind. Al stood up. The motion was smooth and controlled, yet it made about 15 students suddenly reconsider majors that required sharing classrooms with humans. She smiled, probably trying to look reassuring, but it revealed far too many teeth clearly designed for purposes other than eating salad. What kind of competition? She asked. No, Professor Halvoran said quickly. No, absolutely not. Sit down, Miss Whitmore. Vaelric, you will apologize immediately. A simple physical test, Vaelric interrupted, his pride apparently having eliminated every survival instinct he possessed. Arm wrestling. It is a strength assessment perfectly suited to my physiology. My crystalline structure can withstand enormous pressure without damage, unless, of course, you are afraid to demonstrate your true abilities. The challenge hung in the air like a grenade with the pin already pulled. Okay, Elle said, showing that uniquely human mix of friendliness and competitiveness responsible for both the Olympics and several historical wars. Sure, why not? No, Professor Halvoran cried, all 7 eye stalks frozen in horror. Absolutely not. I forbid this. I am submitting an emergency medical request immediately. Campus security is being notified. This violates at least 47 university regulations. Too late. Vaelric had already moved to an empty desk and positioned himself confidently, arm extended. His crystalline body shimmered under the lights, every facet reflecting brilliance in what he clearly believed was a display of evolutionary superiority. The rest of the students began evacuating, not running, because that would have looked improper, but heading toward the exits with impressive urgency. Corin paused at the doorway. Lee, they chimed nervously. Maybe you shouldn't. It's fine, Elle said, rolling her shoulders until her joints popped audibly. 3 remaining students immediately decided Corin had the right idea and left. I'll be gentle. Those words hung in the air like a merciful death sentence that didn't realize what it meant. She walked over to the desk, giving Vaelric roughly 2 seconds to reconsider every decision that had led him here before sitting across from him. Up close, the contrast between them became impossible to ignore. His crystalline arm was elegant and geometric, shaped by evolution on a world where violence was mostly theoretical. Her arm looked like machinery built by survival itself, skin capable of sealing wounds through sheer stubborn biology, muscles designed for endurance, and bones tough enough to survive impacts that would completely destroy his species. Ready when you are, she said cheerfully. Vaelric placed his arm against hers, and instantly realized he had made a catastrophic mistake. Even relaxed, her muscles felt like solid stone. Her skin radiated warmth. Humans ran hotter than most species thanks to their overactive metabolism, and beneath it he could feel tendons shifting over bone forged by Deathworld evolution. Backing out now wasn't an option. His pride wouldn't allow it. Also, 3 classmates had started recording. On 3, Professor Halvoran said weakly from behind his desk, where he had taken cover. 1, 2, medical team, please remain on standby with crystalline reconstruction equipment. 3. Vaelric pushed with everything he had. His crystalline body was engineered for this. Pressure distributed through geometric matrices designed to spread force evenly across his lattice. He could withstand thousands of pounds per square inch without structural failure. He was going to prove physical evolution inferior to optimized structure. He was going to demonstrate superiority. Elle applied what she clearly believed was gentle pressure. The sound was exactly like someone stepping on extremely expensive glass. Vaelric's arm didn't simply break. That would have been mercifully straightforward. His crystalline structure, evolved to distribute force across many surfaces, encountered a level of sustained pressure it had never evolved to handle. The matrices that normally dispersed impact suddenly faced a steady, unstoppable force. A tiny fracture appeared at the point of contact, a hairline crack forming between heartbeats. Then physics, biology, and Vaelric's spectacularly poor decision-making combined into disaster. The crack raced along natural fault lines in his crystal lattice, branching outward like lightning through glass. His wrist, an intricate assembly of interlocking geometric structures, failed completely, shattering into 17 separate fragments. The sound he made wasn't a scream. Vryn didn't possess vocal cords in the traditional sense. It sounded more like shattered glass played backward through a synthesizer operated by someone in the middle of a nervous breakdown. Elle's eyes widened instantly, and she pulled her hand back like she'd touched something hot, raising both palms in the universal "I swear I didn't mean that" gesture. "Oh, crap," she said, genuine horror in her voice. "I barely squeezed." Technically, she was telling the truth. Later analysis of the security footage showed she had used about 8% of her maximum grip strength for roughly 7/10 of a second. The university's human physiology consultant would later explain that this level of force was comparable to her carefully picking up a coffee cup so she wouldn't crush it. Vaelric's arm, meanwhile, was bent at 3 angles that geometry strongly objected to. Shards of crystal lay scattered across the desk like extremely expensive confetti. His prismatic blood, a silicon-based fluid resembling liquid opal, leaked from multiple fracture points. His entire body dimmed, which for Vryn was the biological equivalent of shock. "Medical emergency, classroom 7, Professor Halvoran shouted into his comm, his voice reaching a pitch previously undocumented by science. "Multiple fractures, total joint failure, possible systemic lattice collapse." He paused, listening. Yes, it was a human. Yes, again. No, she wasn't even trying. Just send everyone. The medical team arrived in 45 seconds. Impressive considering they'd started on the opposite side of campus. Then again, after the third human-related incident, the university had invested heavily in rapid response systems. They surrounded Vaelric with professional efficiency, deploying containment fields to stop further fragmentation, injecting stabilizing compounds into his crystalline structure, and transferring him onto a specialized transport designed for silicon-based life forms. "I'm so sorry," Elle kept saying, hovering nearby in a way that clearly made the medics nervous. "I didn't think. I knew you guys were different, but I thought—" "Please step back, Miss Whitmore," the lead medic said gently. Like the professor, they were a centurion, their skin colored in a shade best described as resigned acceptance. "We need to move him immediately. His structure is destabilizing." "Is he going to be okay?" Elle asked, and she sounded honestly worried. "Probably," the medic replied while guiding the transport toward the door. "We've become quite experienced with human-related injuries." This makes the 7th incident this semester. They hurried Vaelric away, his dim body still producing that awful sound like breaking glass echoing through a nightmare. The 5 remaining students stared at Elle with expressions ranging from horror to "I warned you this would happen." Professor Halvoran slowly emerged from behind his desk, his skin cycling through colors that likely meant he was reconsidering his career choices. "Miss Whitmore," he said carefully, "please remain after class. We will need to file another incident report." The story spread across campus faster than light, which was impressive at a university that had literally mastered FTL travel. By the time Elle reached her next class, everyone already knew. The footage had gone viral across the student network, replayed endlessly with the same fascinated horror usually reserved for natural disasters. The comments were exactly what you'd expect. Why would anyone challenge a human physically? This is what happens when you skip orientation. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes, and a 3-month hospital stay. That was her being gentle. I'm transferring. Meanwhile, in the medical bay, Vaelric lay inside a reconstruction chamber, stabilizing fields surrounding him while surgical drones carefully reassembled his shattered crystal lattice. The procedure would take 6 hours and required importing specialized crystalline materials from his homeworld. Doctors predicted 8 additional weeks of regeneration followed by extensive physical therapy. His parents had already been notified. His father, a senator in the 4th Assembly, was reportedly demanding an investigation into campus safety, along with the immediate expulsion of all humans. His mother, taking a more practical approach, had simply asked whether her son had done something unbelievably stupid. The answer was yes. The dean's office reviewed the security footage 3 separate times, analyzing every angle. The conclusion was unavoidable. Ms. Whitmore had accepted a challenge initiated by another student, applied minimal force, and stopped immediately once injury occurred. Vaelric had started the confrontation, ignored faculty warnings, and effectively injured himself through arrogance. "Do we have grounds for disciplinary action?" Dean Draveth asked while watching the footage again. "Against whom?" the assistant replied. The human followed standard challenge protocols, demonstrated restraint, and ceased immediately when damage occurred. Frankly, she showed remarkable control. Vaelric violated harassment policies and ignored direct faculty orders. So, we are not punishing the human who sent a student to surgery. We are not punishing the human who was challenged by someone too arrogant to understand basic physics. If we discipline her, we establish the precedent that humans are responsible for other species failing to assess threats accurately. Dean Draveth sighed. Add another mandatory seminar. Death World Species. Do not engage physically. Make attendance required for all incoming students. And send a memo to faculty. The assistant waited. Any student who challenges a human to physical competition, the dean continued, will be considered to have accepted full responsibility for the outcome. 3 weeks later, Vaelric returned to class. His arm had been reconstructed using reinforced crystalline matrices stronger than the original, though visible fault lines remained, permanent reminders etched into his structure. He walked with a slight unevenness now, proof that pride and physics rarely worked well together. The classroom fell silent when he entered. Elle glanced up from her notes, immediately smiling. "Hey, you're back. How are you feeling?" Vaelric's crystalline body flickered faintly, possibly fear. "Fine," he said quietly, taking a seat in the back row. "I brought you something," Elle said, pulling out a package. "It's a traditional human, sorry I broke you gift basket. There's chocolate, which you probably can't eat, a book on comparative evolutionary biology, and one of those stress balls. But I tested it first and it exploded," she added. "So, maybe don't squeeze it too hard." Thank you," Vaelric said quickly, grabbing the basket and retreating to his seat as fast as dignity allowed. Professor Halvoran resumed the lecture. His skin settled into a cautious shade of neutral blue. The university had already introduced new seating regulations. Humans were now required to remain at least 3 meters away from any species classified as structurally fragile. Warning signs appeared across campus. Please do not challenge humans to physical contests. Insurance premiums had risen again. Elle took notes with enthusiastic focus, occasionally raising her hand to ask questions that proved she fully understood quantum mechanics while remaining completely unaware of how terrifying she seemed to everyone else. For once, Vaelric stayed quiet in the back row. His reconstructed arm stood as a permanent reminder of the galaxy's most important lesson about humans. They weren't trying to intimidate anyone. They weren't attempting to prove superiority. They had simply evolved on a planet that spent millions of years actively trying to kill them, and they had survived so completely that they no longer remembered what it felt like to be prey. Slowly, and often painfully, The galaxy was learning that humans were the friendliest apex predators you could ever meet, right up until the moment you forced them to demonstrate it. And once that happened, the best outcome you could hope for was that they'd feel terrible afterward and show up with a gift basket. Vaelric looked down at his arm, at the fault lines that would remain with him for the rest of his life, then glanced toward the human responsible, who had caused all of it while barely exerting effort. At that moment, she was happily explaining something to Corin, waving those terrifying hands around as she talked, completely unaware that half the class still watched her with quiet fear. Official reports later named the incident the Crystalline fracture event, and it ended up creating an entirely new category of university policy. There were now mandatory seminars, expanded orientation programs, warning signage, and even a specialized medical team trained specifically to treat injuries caused by human interaction. And through all of it, humans remained genuinely confused about why everyone treated them like natural disasters that had learned how to smile and say please. Carefully, mindful of his rebuilt arm, Vaelric opened the gift basket. Inside, along with the items Elle had mentioned, he found a handwritten note in surprisingly neat script. "Sorry again about your arm. Let me know if you need help catching up on assignments. I promise I'll be more careful. Sometimes I forget not everyone's built like us. Friends?" He stared at the note for a long time, the casual offer of friendship from a being who had nearly killed him by accident, and realized something important. The rest of the galaxy was still misunderstanding the situation. Humans weren't the problem. Their capacity for violence wasn't the problem either. The real issue was that humans sincerely, honestly wanted friendship, and had absolutely no idea how terrifying that offer sounded to everyone else. In the end, Vaelric learned his lesson. He never challenged another human again, helped found the Human Interaction Safety Committee, and graduated with honors. The scar across his arm became a popular conversation topic, a physical reminder that in a vast and diverse galaxy, some species had truly earned their place at the top of the food chain, and wisdom meant acknowledging that fact before attempting to test it personally. As for Lena Whitmore, she continued excelling academically, built friendships across multiple species, and remained blissfully unaware that she had become the subject of numerous safety briefings, 3 revised university policies, and at least one of the most